Hi, Julie. Welcome to the show. It is a pleasure and an honor to have you.
Thank you, Vanessa. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, we've spoke a bit off air, and this topic it's a little bit of a heavy one, but I feel like after having this conversation and you educating our audience on all the things that you're so experienced in, I feel like it's going to be something that feels, I don't know, more tangible, something that's really applicable to, I guess just all of us, right? Like, because I feel like this particular subject matter, it can be scary. It can be something that is intimidating, and we'll talk about that. But with all of your experience, I'm just so honored to have you, so you can sort of, help us through all of the steps and all of the, just navigate it all. So again, it's really a pleasure.
Thank you.
But before we get into it, why don't you give us a little bit of a background on you? How did you get here? Like tell us a little bit about your experience and your professional history.
Yeah, it's been a journey for sure. When I was a teenager, my mom said to me, "Hey, Julie, why don't you become a nurse?" And it really resonated with me. And I was like, yeah, that feels good. Because she had always wanted to be a nurse. So I applied for nursing school and got right in. And that began, I was 17 years old. So yeah, I worked as an LPN for 10 years, a licensed practical nurse. And then as I wanted to do more in my career of stepping up into some leadership and management, I got my bachelor's degree. And then, gosh, I worked mostly in the hospital's critical care, but also did, the ER, the trauma center. And then I was a flight nurse on the helicopter for 10 years, and that was really fun in Las Vegas.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
that was an
Wow.
adventure. A
I
lot of
bet.
learning there.
I bet.
Yeah. And then my friend said to me one time, "Why don't you come over and teach with me at the university?" And I thought, oh, that's something I haven't tried yet. So then I needed to get my master's degree. But in that research, because you have to pick a thesis, right? I was intrigued with patient safety because when I was teaching in the classroom, there was a lot of stories that we came across in case studies to try to help the students learn about patient harm. And it just intrigued me. Like, why is this happening? Healthcare, we assume, is going to be a safe place, and found out that it wasn't so. So I started my research back in 2009, and then I moved on to my doctoral degree and continued the research there. So that kind of brings me to 15 years of researching this topic and knowing that we've got to find answers because 250,000 patients die every year from preventable medical harm. And it's not getting any better. We're not moving the needle on that. And we must, because every one of those patients are someone's family member, right?
Yeah. And is that just a US statistic?
It's interesting. I did that research for my book and found out that Canada and the UK had very similar statistics,
Wow.
but they've also approached it at a different angle now with their healthcare systems. I know the UK is doing some phenomenal things. They just um, implemented the first patient safety officer in England, and I got to hear her speak last month at a conference, and she's amazing, Henrietta Hughes. So I know there's hope. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I know I made a comment, and again, it's a heavy kind of a sombering, or I should say sobering thing to say. But I feel like these numbers are conservative. I said that to you off air. I don't, I feel like the actual reporting, like the reporting that's given, the statistics that are given versus what's really going on, I feel like it never
Yes,
matches up. Do you agree?
absolutely. I think that number is shocking enough,
Yeah.
250,000.
Yeah.
But when you look at the reporting, for instance, of sentinel events, which are things that should never happen in the hospital, it's voluntary right now. So just the data in 2023 reported there was over 1,400, 1,483, something like that, of harm events, serious harm events to be considered a sentinel event. And that was what was reported. But when you do the statistics, and 20% of that was patient deaths. So 80% of that number was harm, 20% with deaths. that only means less than 300 patients died of a medical error. And we know it's way more than that. So voluntarily reporting does not help us because we have to have transparency to understand the full scope of the problem. We can't find solutions and answers if it's hidden behind the what I call the Wizard of Oz curtain of healthcare, where it's all shrouded in mystery and swept under the carpet or put into a closet, whatever analogy you want to use, right?
Yeah.
Because it's embarrassing, I would imagine, even as a person making a mistake, let alone a system's making mistakes or errors.
Yeah. Yeah. And oh boy, I feel like I could go off on a tangent right now just about that statement alone because
Yes.
I feel like there's, oh gosh, how do I even say it? Well, let's just say in the last 4 to 5 years, I feel like a lot has been exposed in terms of what really goes on behind the hospital doors,
Yeah,
and people have lost so much trust. In
you're
fact, I
right.
saw a statistic just this week that it's like I don't remember. I don't remember, but I want to say 40 to 50%. May could be higher. Don't quote me, but of just the U.S. population has lost trust in the medical and healthcare system just over the last few years.
Yeah, it's not surprising to me.
Yeah.
For 20 something years in a row, nurses have been voted in a Gallup poll the most trusted profession. The only year that we lost it was during 9/11 when the firemen got that highest award of trust, and then it went back to nursing. But in all honesty, it's not being earned right now because of the mistakes that keep happening and no solid solutions that have been able to move the needle. There's a lot of work groups and advocacy groups and patient safety agendas. And, I think we just need to bring it all together because it's almost like they're all working in silos. And this is a pervasive, huge national problem, as we've already said. And I think the first thing we need to do is just put it all on the table.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. Just kind of curious off the cuff question before we get into it more. Was there ever like a personal shift for you? I mean, have you ever had a personal experience that brought you to this place, or was it all really what you saw like professionally? Because I feel like sometimes we're moved by the real intimate things that happen to us in life. And sometimes it is really like our own experience or something that happens with an immediate family member and so forth. Was there anything like that for you, or was it just kind of what you were seeing in the workplace?
Well, my parents were actually in a small airplane accident. My father had built this small airplane in our garage until it got big enough, and then he had to move it outside in Spokane, Washington, and he flew it for like 6 years. But they had left Spokane to go visit my grandmother in California, were on their way home and stopped for fuel in Oregon, and he forgot to latch the canopy door. And so they went down and hit a barn and barely survived, but they did survive. And so I'm living across the country, working in the ICU full time in Florida with 5 children. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't leave my family and my job to go take care of my parents. So this anxiety of please take care of my parents. And we are lucky they survived. I'm not sure they would nowadays. Yes, we have better technology, but the hospital acquired infections, all of the things that happen in healthcare harm right now seem to be not getting better, but going the wrong way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. That I didn't expect that story. First of all, that's quite intense. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I just, a lot of obviously, and again, I feel like I make this joke. It's not really a joke, but it kind of is a joke because I always say every show, I feel like my regular listeners are probably like rolling their eyes by now because I say the same thing every episode, which is, people always have something personal that happens to them, which creates the shift, which it creates the pivot for them to walk down this other path. And a lot of people are practitioners or, health coaches or, people like yourself who are really,
Yeah.
just in this position where they start out one way and they end up completely walking in a different direction because of their own personal experience.
Right.
Um, and I've told you too, when we were chatting recently that this is also I hate to be dramatic about it, but it's also a little personal for me, because I have had a very, very close friend who, lost her only
Mm,
child this year, and there was some negligence that went down. And I think with all of the hustle and bustle that goes on with what's occurring during these events, and there's so much that goes on that a lot of times a person misses uh like they miss things, right? There's so much emotion that goes into things, and
right.
they look back at it and they say, oh, if only I would have done this, if only I could have known
Hmm.
this. And so, watching my again, she's like so close to me, and to watch her kind of go through the memories and
Mm,
to look back and to say, wow, I wish I would have known this. And I know things, obviously, we understand there's a bigger plan at play, right? But at the end of the day, she even mentioned to me recently how she wished she had some of the knowledge
yeah.
in terms of patient advocacy, because a lot of people today still don't have the proper tools when they're going in as a family member or as a friend or even as themselves, right?
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it is very, well, healthcare is complex. Let's just say that, right? There's so many moving parts. And when I say medical error, really it falls back on systems errors for the majority of problems. And that's what we need to look at, because if it's impacting, that's why I say transparency too. Because if one nurse or one physician or one respiratory therapist makes a mistake, but nobody knows about it, we don't know that that same error can be happening in 100 different hospitals. And so we're not addressing it because we're not aware of it. So that's part of it. But as you said, educating yourself, because we're all going to be a patient in the hospital or have a family member in the hospital at some point, whether it's today or a year from now or 10 years from now, right? It's not something that's just going to impact the rare few. So when we can empower ourselves with some knowledge, which is why I wrote the book for patients and their families, just to have a baseline understanding of what is normal vital signs, what's a normal heart rate. And so an adult is 60 to 100, for example. And if your dad's in the ICU and his heart rate's 100 and it's staying 100 and now it's 110, there's something serious going on.
Yeah.
And so having the voice and being empowered enough to say, hey, somebody needs to check this. There's something really wrong here. But I think most people don't have that confidence to even know, number one, what is normal, but number two, that they must speak up. They have to. It's going to make the difference between life and death.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine that there's probably some people listening that are thinking to themselves, well, we shouldn't have to. Like, we shouldn't
Right.
have to be in this position. But, and I know you'll agree with me, we're doing this show in part because reality is reality. And we are in this position today. And we can talk about why we should be able to trust the experts. I say this in quotes. Or we should be able to trust the doctor in the white coat or the nurse or whatever. And no shade towards, the great
Right.
professionals out there. I mean, you're one of them, right? Like an exceptional professional, who's really like here to educate and to help. But we have to, like most areas in life today, if we don't take a step and advocate for ourselves, again, it's not just about healthcare. It could be in the education system. It could be with our
Right.
kids, whatever. Then we're going to lose because we just don't have the same. The world is different. I guess the
Yes.
world is different and it's changed, so
Yeah.
whether or not you feel like, well, we should be able to trust them and we shouldn't have to, too bad. I hate to say
Right.
it, but too bad, because we're in a position and we really need to take the appropriate and proper steps to be able to speak up for ourselves and for it to be okay, because I think there's so much intimidation. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, absolutely. I even saw it as a nurse working in the hospital, with that hierarchy or
Yeah.
presumed hierarchy that puts, higher ups on that pedestal. And I've had the attitude, like, don't question me, I'm the doctor. Or it's like, but I'm here for the same purpose you are, is to make this patient better.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing, because I'm at the bedside 12 hours, and with you coming in on an average of 2 minutes or, or whatever, we're partnering in, this health system. So we need to work together. It isn't about get the ego out of here. There's no room for it,
That's it.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's it. And that's hard, because I understand, people go to school and they go to school for a really long time and they're trained a certain way, unfortunately
Hmm.
there's not everything is incorporated, but they're trained a certain way and they have this sort of, I don't know, these thoughts of, well, it doesn't really matter. I am the professional. I am here to do the job. You didn't go to school for this, and so you're not to question me. And I feel like even though it's changing today, even though that I
Hmm.
think that overall energy is changing, I do think there still are a lot of people who stay quiet because they just don't want to rock the boat. They're intimidated, or they just feel like, well, I have to respect them no matter what, even if they have that intuition inside, like
Right.
something is off, and they decide not to listen to it.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest challenge in not feeling empowered to speak up or
Yeah.
challenge, because I've had patients say to me, I'm just afraid if I do speak up and become the squeaky wheel, that my mom is not going to get the care she needs, that when leave, that they'll, whatever. I don't know if that's true, but I can see where that feeling would come from. And it's a culture shift that we have to make on both ends. We need to empower patients and their families, and we also need the healthcare system to acknowledge, hey, families are here to help us.
Yeah.
And that's how I would always teach my students is if the husband of that patient you're taking care of says, my wife's, there's something wrong with her, you need to listen because he knows. Just because you may not see it on the vital signs yet, or, in her mental status changes, he knows something's off, and we need to pay attention because those early cues are the ones that we can act on and intervene in a timely fashion that'll change things.
Yes, absolutely makes so much sense. And let's talk a little bit more about those cues. What are you've mentioned respiratory rate, which makes a lot of
Hmm.
sense. And I've been in a situation where I had a parent who was in a hospital post surgery whose respiratory rate was extremely high, and there was some issues there. And and I happened to be there when it was happening, and so I was in a position of, yeah, I don't think this is normal.
Right.
But and you can talk more about it if you want. But what are like the primary warning signs that something is not going right that can potentially lead to medical error or negligence?
So I kind of categorize this as I've been teaching students and then outlining it in my book too, but vital signs are big. Know what normals are, know what the baseline of your parent or whoever the patient is. Like if mom's heart rate's 100 and it's been that way all day, that's higher than normal. What's going on? But if it was 80 this afternoon and now in the evening it's 100, that's a big change. So looking for changes. Neurological status. So even being slightly confused longer than 10 minutes means something's going on. The most common restlessness and anxiousness and anxiety is due to hypoxia or low oxygen levels. So when the brain isn't getting enough glucose or oxygen, that right there is going to be impacted really quickly because the brain is the highest priced real estate in our body that's going to take up most of the oxygen and the glucose, for metabolism. But so neurological changes, vital sign changes, but also there's later signs or laggers such as perfusion. So if mom's hands are cold and her blood pressure's low, or the foot is cold, I just did a TikTok on this one yesterday of a true case, unfortunately. The man had knee surgery. His foot, he said, I don't feel the sensation. It's kind of like pins and needles. And then his foot got cooler. The pulse in that foot got weaker. Well, the nurse was afraid to call the doctor because the first time she did, he goes, it's been that way since surgery. Don't worry about it. So she didn't check it the rest of the night. And when the surgeon came in the morning, they took him to emergent surgery because it was cold. There was swelling from the thigh down to the foot, and they couldn't save his leg. And
Oh,
those signs of perfusion are huge. I mean, there's signals that something is wrong. So another sign of perfusion would be low urine output. Normal is minimum of 30 mLs per hour. That's minimum for kidney function. And so that's one of the things the nurses should be watching too. But as a family member, you can, hey, dad hasn't peed in 12 hours. What's going on here? And you correlate those symptoms or signs with other things like low blood pressure or increased heart rate or low oxygen. So it paints a puzzle. The clinical signs occur 6 to 24 hours prior to an unplanned cardiac arrest or death.
Wow. Of course, don't quote me because I'm not going. I don't know the statistic, but you probably do. There is a statistic that floats around somewhere about cardiac arrest. Now that you just said that, it's crazy high in terms of the unnecessary arrests that occur
Yeah.
in the hospital. Do you know that statistic offhand?
It's 80% that are
Wow,
preventable.
that's what I heard.
Yeah.
Wow.
And what's so sad about that is it was 19% survivable rate and now it's down to 17.
Oh,
So only 17%, even if they do CPR, survive to discharge, which just means prevention is what we've got to be, you
yeah.
know, high priority on everything we do, taking care of patients is noticing, because here's how I explained it to my students. There's this continuum. Our right hand here is healthy. Well, not that many patients are in the acute care setting being healthy, right? And then the other end of that continuum is the patient is dead. Well, every patient is somewhere on that continuum. And that is our job as nurses. And that's where families can come in and help too, is noticing, hey, mom's not as she's really sleepy, but she's been sleeping all day. That's not like her. How much pain medication has she had? Or just tuning into the clues of, something that maybe doesn't feel like right, like you said earlier,
Yeah, yeah. Oh, this is such good information. You just said something. I had back pocketed a question for you that because I heard you say something a couple minutes ago, and then you just said it right now, which was pain medication. So I think that one of the things that can be brushed off is if someone say, I'm in there with a parent or a friend or whatnot, and
Mhm.
they're on some sort of medication, but you're still noticing that there's something wrong, right? There's something off. How common is it for a professional, a nurse or a doctor, to come back at you and say it's because they're on medication? Like, don't worry about those signs or signals. It's because they're on medication. That to me seems very sketchy because yes, potentially it could be the meds, but it could not be the meds.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. So, any kind of pain medication or anti-anxiety medication, sedatives are going to usually make the heart rate lower, the blood pressure lower, and the breathing rate lower. Yes, so we're not talking normal should be 14 to 18 breaths per minute for breathing. Anywhere down between 12, we're getting like that needs to be watched and monitored because the problem is it can deteriorate further, meaning now it's 10, now it's 8, now it's 6,
Yeah.
and then they quit breathing. And because the buildup of carbon dioxide in the blood, when we're not blowing it off with breathing enough times a minute, then that contributes to what we call CO2 narcosis, which really brings them into that state of not breathing at all. So while they, yes, are accurate in that medication is going to impact those things, there's a fine line there, which just means we need to monitor them even closer if that's the case.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and you just automatically assume. I mean, I guess not today. I would say not today. I wouldn't assume, but even, 6, 7, 8 years ago, I would just, if I was in there as an advocate or as a family member, I would just naturally assume that the professionals are on top of this, that they're
Right.
watching, that they're monitoring, because the question would be, or I should say, the assumption would be, well, of course they know. They do this all the time. They learn this in school. But clearly, it's not always the case, you know?
Correct. Correct. There have been several studies over the last 25 years, and they're not good ones. They're indicating with these trends that our nurses graduating from school and passing the boards to get their license are not safe and practice ready. And unfortunately, I just left a really large nursing university that I was at. We had 2,700 students. I was so surprised, even though I felt like we gave them a really good education. They're just not ready for practice, meaning there's too many questions still that they don't know how to answer. And honestly, a lot of students faked it, not knowing. And I've heard nurses do the same thing, making up an answer. So, and I'm not trying to throw my profession under the bus, but knowing that you cannot rely on the healthcare system to keep you safe. And yes, you don't need a medical degree or a nursing degree. I think even knowing some of the basics will help you navigate what's right and what's questionable and how you can know when to persist. I'm going, no, I insist somebody come in here and help my husband. This isn't right. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I'm gonna ask you some questions about being more persistent and how to kind of get those messages across in a diplomatic way. But I think before we move on, I think my last question there would be, and it's so I think complex. I almost hesitate to ask you, but some of me thinks that there's always been a lack of preparation when people go through school and come out of school, because also experience is really what gives you the most
yeah,
experience, right? Like
yeah,
it's not until you're hands on, right? And that's really where the learning, where the classroom is, right? The classroom is the work. But
yes.
if you could sort of nail down like one or two root causes of why there's such an uptick in a lack of preparation for these students when they're graduating, what would you
Yeah.
say?
Well, I know that a lot of hospitals, because they operate on such a narrow margin, that they're disbanding new graduate programs, which is really the bridge between school and practice. They call it transition to practice. A lot of hospitals, that's where they're cutting corners. So that's part of it. I think the other part of it is nurses are not staying in the profession like they used to, because healthcare is so, it's like I said before, complex, but it can get a little crazy too.
Yeah.
And so nurses are just like, I need to find something else to do, and so when I transitioned from the med surge floor to ICU, I had 8 weeks of didactic in the classroom learning. And then I had another 3 months with a mentor, a preceptor. And now students, or not students, now nurses going into ICU can take an online course.
Oh,
And then
wow.
there are in some hospitals in some states, and there are just not enough. I mean, my mentor I had was in the ICU for 18 years. I mean, she could do it with her eyes closed, and there was many resources to just say, hey, I'm not sure what to do about this. Who do I ask or what do we do? And they could help you figure it out. And that's how you learn. So experience is only a great teacher when there's someone to help you assimilate what it means, and then your knowledge, that your theoretical knowledge, to make it applicable to what's going on with this patient right now.
Wow.
So I think we're
Wow.
missing both of those things.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it makes a lot of sense. Okay. This is another off the cuff question. I've things are just coming up. They're just coming up
It's
right now.
okay.
They're like written down. But I feel like that's how all these conversations tend to go for me. Uh, I can't help but think as I'm sitting here listening to you, and I feel I have so much respect for you to sort of like see, you've basically seen a problem or a hole and you're trying to fill it, right? Which a lot of people
Yes.
don't do. And I hate to say it because a lot of it, again, it's like there's just certain personality types out there where they just can't go to sleep at night. It just eats at them. And then there are other people that just, all right, well, I got to pay the bills and here we are.
Not my
And
problem.
not my problem, right? Like it's just as long as my lights are on and my table is full of food. And I get it. People are stressed and trying to pay bills and burnt out, and there's a million things going on in life. But why don't you, because it doesn't feel like there's a lot of people. Why do you think that there are not more of you speaking up and talking about this?
I think it has to light whatever topic it is, or whatever subject, or whatever, it has to light your heart up
Mm,
and resonate with you so deeply that you can't not do it.
yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know, I mean, mine, I think, was accumulation. We talked about my parents' accident, but it was also in teaching students, and finding subpar healthcare is why these preventable errors occur. And then, honestly, reading the stories of real families, every time I hear one, it just breaks my heart. I'm like, I can't even imagine. Like the story I opened my book with, Lewis Blackman, 15 years old, over 4 days. So 30 hours, he had surgery. Over 30 hours was deteriorating with the signs we talked about earlier. His feet were cold, his hands were cold, his heart was beating too fast. And his mother was like, something is wrong with my son. His lips were pale, until when he finally cardiac arrested, they couldn't save him. But it's those kinds of stories. I can't imagine losing a child regardless, but one that was preventable, just So my mission, if I can save one patient's life, then my work is worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just, it almost makes me tear up because I have so
Me
much
too.
respect. I know, like it really does. I just, like you said, if you can save one person's life or have one child saved so that that mother father doesn't lose
Yeah.
them, I mean, it means the absolute world. Like, and you're
Yeah.
doing it. You are doing it, and there's just so much to be said about following the call on your life. And,
Yeah.
props to you because I think a lot of people know that they hear it, they kind of feel the itch, but they feel intimidated. Maybe they have like
Mm,
imposter syndrome of some kind, like who's going to listen to me, or who am I to
yeah.
step up and take initiative. But at the same time, it's like, well, why not you? Right? Why not you? Because if it's not you, who's going like you are also, you're capable, right? I mean, I'm sure you probably agree with me, but do-
Yeah.
I feel like, we all have to realize that we have I don't want to say power because that sounds,
Yeah.
kind of like high and mighty, but I do feel like there is there's always a place for a voice. And
You're right.
and you've definitely taken the step. And so I just, again, going off tangent a little bit, but I just feel like it's just so admirable. And I just feel like I hope that more people pop up, follow your lead in this particular
Oh,
arena
thank you.
because it's amazing that you've really stepped up and done the work and followed the call.
Thank you. It took me, like I said, I've been a nurse for 45 years now. And I remember sitting on the couch with my dad when I was 18 with this just overwhelming sensation and feeling of almost this angst. And I told him, I said, Dad, I just feel like there's something I'm supposed to do with my life, something like really important. And he goes, well, you are, honey. You're a nurse and you're a mom. And I said, I know, but it's more than that.
Mm, you knew.
And one of my favorite quotes, you just kind of almost said it, is the Jewish scholar Hillel when he says, if not you, then who? And if not now, when? And so when I started doing this research in 2009, I'm like, why isn't somebody doing something? And I continued on my path of, teaching students and, running nursing schools. And then it just gave me this big aha moment that this was it from what I said to my dad at 18. And it was almost like the universe saying, Julie, been waiting for you. Let's go, girl. Come on, it's you.
Yeah, here you are. Here you are. And it's
Oh,
never too late. Never too late.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I talk about that often, but it's like, sometimes people don't find um, their real passion or something like after their career sort of, maybe their
Right.
career's been in the works for 25, 30 years. And then all of a sudden there's
Yep.
a little bit of a pivot, and here you
Hmm.
are. So it's amazing. It's
I'm
amazing.
63.
Oh my gosh. Okay, fine. First of all, give us your secrets, okay? You guys, if you're not watching the video and you're just listening to audio, Julie looks much younger than that. She's absolutely
Oh, well,
beautiful.
thank you. But you're right. This is like 2.0. This is like
Yeah.
the next, and you're right. It can be at any time. It's kind of like I know this is so cliche, but when the stars align, it's just like, all right,
Yeah.
take the
Yeah.
next step.
Yeah. Yeah. You'll be led. Believe me, you will be led. And you are.
Yes.
So I know that you have, and I know you write about it in the book, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but you have some very practical patient advocacy tips and some little, I think that you have like some acronyms or something of that
Hmm.
nature that you share and that I think are really helpful for people who are either first of all, we can talk about that as well. Like people who are in the hospital that might not have an advocate, but also people who are advocating for family members or friends in the hospital. So, I guess for the coherent patient or for the family members, what are some of these, tips, advocacy tips that you can share with us?
Oh, thank you for asking. And this just came over time, with being a nurse and working with students. But the first one I call the three P's, and it is be present. And that means also in your heart. Come from a place when you're having conversations that you're present with yourself and the best intention for that patient. That's why we're here. So be present, but also be present when the doctors are making rounds, if you can, and be present at shift change when the nurses are giving each other information. A lot of places have walking rounds where shift report is given at the bedside and listen in. They should be inviting you in because then you can say, oh, remember dad did this, or, just to make sure information is passed along. So be present and then be polite. So again, just I know you're having a stressful day. Healthcare is stressful, period. And sometimes it's like high anxiety that makes us not be at our most polite self. But again, how we say things can be just as important as what we say, right? And the third P is be persistent. When you just know something isn't quite right, or you get an answer that's like, yeah, maybe, but yes, you have the medical degree, but I know my mother.
Mm.
And so be persistent. And then the second tool is the cuss words, not what you think it is. It's language you can use, the four words, either one of these words, concerned, uncomfortable, scared, or a safety issue. And so when you need to get the attention for critical something you need to convey, use one of those words with the healthcare team. For example, I'm very concerned about my mother. She's just not waking up. This is not like her. Or I'm really uncomfortable with the amount of pain my husband is in. This just does not seem right. Or I'm scared. My husband just told me he's going to die. Or this is a safety issue. Listen, my son's cast is too tight. His toes are turning blue. Somebody needs to come in here and address this right now. So it's calling out with the intention, best intention for that patient that we're working together to do it. But you've got to get their attention to listen to what you have to say. Even if you don't know exactly what it is, you've got to attempt. Because here's what I say, if you're scared and you keep it inside and something wrong or something bad happens, how are you going to feel? I can
Mhm.
guarantee you that feeling is a thousand times worse than being scared to speak up. So,
Absolutely. I love the idea. First of all, it's so simple and so practical, but I love the idea of using keywords. I'm a words person. I just am. Like, I mean, I can't solve a math problem or do calculus or science to save my life, but I was always very wordsy growing up. I loved vocabulary and spelling, and it's just, and I just love language in general, but I love just having like some very key words in your back pocket to pull out, because I feel like sometimes you get so flustered that in those moments you don't you get tied up, right? Your tongue is
mhm,
tied. You
yeah.
obviously you're elevated yourself, and your blood pressure is probably off the rails, or you're
Oh,
stressed and you've got the anxiety. But to sort of, even if you, this is something I would probably do, even if you write it down, you put it in your phone in your little notes
yeah,
section, or you throw it on a piece of paper and put it in your pocket. Just
yeah,
little things, little tangible reminders that you can have, that you can pull out or call on when you need it. It's so helpful, and it's so simple. That's the best part
yeah.
about it.
You brought up a really good point. I think taking notes is extremely important because it's hard to keep track of all the details. And you assume that the healthcare team is going to keep track of all those details that matter. They're not always. It may be in different parts of the chart. And so, really having it in a succinct place, even if it's that notepad in your purse or your back pocket, is really meaningful. No, that's not what happened 3 days ago. This is what happened. And coupled with what happened yesterday, that's why I'm really concerned. Something needs to be done.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's so true. And this really plays into what you said a couple minutes ago. And it's such a great point, which is the shift change, and that's what I unfortunately experienced with my friend, is that during the shift changes was where there was a lot of very sketchy stuff that started to occur, and I remember
Mm,
my friend telling me, because we're about, she lives about 8, 9 hours away. And so, but I was on the phone with her almost every day, and she would tell me, like, there's some nurses that just, they seem like they've no idea after shift change. It's like this really uneasy, scary feeling, because it seems like they have no clue what's going on. And then there's one or two that are really on top of things, and I don't know how to handle it, and she was
yeah,
so flustered. And so I feel like things like taking notes, or just paying attention, or, whatever works for you, because everybody's
Yeah.
different. Some people can store it all up in the head. I personally cannot. I'm not that talented. But things like that could be, I think, really helpful, just jotting
Yeah.
things down. And like you said, being present during these changes, I think is also, could be very helpful and important too.
You bring up a good point. When, and I'm sure she's right in feeling the difference in those nurses, the ones that knew what they were doing and experienced, and the other ones that were kind of faking it until they figure it out.
Yeah.
But who do you escalate to? Who do you persist to? So in the hospital, there's always a charge nurse. And then after the charge nurse, there's always a house supervisor. And after the supervisor, there is an administrator on call. So nights and weekends, there is always someone you can escalate to and demand that you get help for your loved one. And I say demand when it gets to the point where you know exactly something's wrong. The other thing is the rapid response team. Most hospitals have a rapid response team, and most acute care settings. And so, you can suggest it. Hey, I think my dad really needs some more help. Would you consider calling the rapid response team? Some hospitals also give that same phone number to family members, which is golden,
Wow.
because then you can say, yeah, I can't get attention for my dad and something's really wrong. I need you to come check it out.
Wow.
So there's those types of things people don't know either, right?
Yeah, yeah. I didn't know it because I have it jotted down here actually. Like I was going to ask you,
Mhm.
what happens if you're calling attention to something and they're pushing back, right? That was going to be my question. Who do you go to? Because some people
Yeah,
are like, well, I'm telling them, I'm telling the nurse, I'm telling the doctor, and some people know there's a charge nurse, but some people don't. So
right.
that was going to be my question. So you really do. I mean, and again, you said it, there is something to be said about being kind and being polite and being
Hmm.
diplomatic, because it is not just
Yeah,
what you say, it's how you say it. I was just having this conversation last night with my husband, and not because of us. Okay, I'll just share it. We were at a restaurant that we typically go to, and there was something wrong with the food.
mm,
And my husband was very reluctant because he's like, we've never had a bad meal here. It's always so good. And but he was like kind of sad that his food, and I told him, I said, they would appreciate the feedback. It's
yeah,
all about how we tell them. And
right.
I had the conversation with him, and then the waiter ended up coming, and he looked at me after my husband said, "Yeah, everything's fine." And the waiter looked at me and said, "Are you sure?" I must have been omitting something, right? Like omitting something off. If
Yeah,
you maybe you saw my, and so we just told him, and the waiter ended up saying, "You guys are awesome. Like, thank you so much for telling us." And I later told my husband, I said, if you were the owner of this restaurant, wouldn't you want to know? It's all about
right.
how you go about it. It's not necessarily the
Yeah,
info. So again,
yeah,
instead of a weird parallel, but going back to this, it's like it's about how you approach. And a lot of times you will get more bees with honey, right?
right, right.
However, there are these situations, obviously, where there is going to be pushback, or there's going to be attitude that bounces back in your face. And those are the situations or the occurrences, I think, where you need to know, okay, what's my next step?
And I think I'm glad you used that word because if they're pushing back, you need to push back too.
Mm,
You don't go cower in the corner and say, okay, well, I tried, when you still have this ball of anxiety in your gut that you know something's wrong.
yeah. Yeah. It's hard, I mean, even
It is.
I have a mouth on me. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I mean, I'm pretty like vocal. I'm somebody who tends to be a little bit more in your face, but never disrespectful unless someone really crosses me, and then I'm like, okay, no. But even me in that situation, I would probably feel some intimidation because, again, you're in a
Yeah,
heightened situation. You're very on edge. There's a lot of nerves, swirling around. You're clearly in a position where there's probably a safety issue.
yeah,
And, we can get flustered. And so I understand how difficult it is, especially when someone doesn't have that natural tendency.
right.
But
I felt it myself when I went to the dermatologist last spring. He's coming in the room, comes over to me, and he starts like getting prepared to do this little biopsy I needed. I'm like, sir, would you please go to the sink and wash your hands? And it was hard for me to say even because I understand you don't want to make that like, oh, he thinks I'm a troublemaker type of thing. And that was a little thing. And he goes, well, I just washed him before I came in the room. I said, sir, I'm a nurse and I know You may have, but I need to see that you do, please. You're going to be cutting inside my body.
Wow. Good for
And he
you.
did. But I
Good.
think if more people do that, then they'll just do it and not push back so much.
Yeah.
It's changing the culture, like we said when we first started, talking about this.
Yeah.
It is. It's a big change, but it needs to happen.
That's that's a good that's a good little example, and it reminded me of something that I heard. I have to share it because it's just too it's too good, and it parallels that exact example with the dermatologist. Is that I have a good girlfriend of mine who had an issue this last week with an upper respiratory infection, and she ended up going to
Mhm.
the ER, or excuse me, urgent care, and she's not one to necessarily just take all the drugs and so forth. Like she tries to be, pretty minimal with those things, but she was having a really hard time breathing. And so they wanted to give her a prednisone shot, right?
Mhm.
And get some, and get a breathing treatment and so forth. And she was for it. So when they came into the room, they had already filled the vial or the
Mhm. A
needle.
little
And so,
chamber.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep, exactly. And she said, no. And she literally said, I need you to fill the chamber in front of me. And I want to see what you're filling it with because I can't trust anybody anymore today. And the nurse said, or whoever it was, wow, you're one of those. And she said, I
Wow.
sure am. And she said, and I will not allow you to put that in my backside until you do it in front of me. And she ended up saying, okay. And she did it.
Kudos to her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She did it.
Good
She did it.
for her.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would not have even remembered that story if you wouldn't have shared the dermatologist experience. But you guys, I think hopefully these experiences, and they're not like you're not in an acute situation where well, maybe she was a little bit, but you're in the hospital. But these little examples, they should really move you to have the confidence to say, this really can happen. Like this is important stuff because again, it's like the whole squeaky wheel gets the oil thing, but truly it's like, yeah, this is your life or your child's life or your
Yeah.
husband or wife's life or your friend's life. Like it's better to do it with a little bit of nerves and courage than regret.
hmm I don't know if I shared this statistic with you or your audience, but there was a study done not too long ago, a few years, by the Department of Human Health and Services. 1 in 4 patients in the hospital suffer some kind of harmful event. So, of course, not everybody dies. But I mean, I was just talking to a friend of mine who's a nursing instructor, and she said, yeah, the student pulled up and gave double the dose of Demerol, which is a narcotic, and they had to give the reversal naloxone. Um, the patient didn't die, but that's harm.
Uh-huh.
So it happens so frequently. So if it's 1 in 4, have already shared several of your friends had events, one unfortunately with a real tragedy, and one of them could have been. And it really is that frequently that you can't not speak up. You cannot not educate yourself, at least to some degree, and understand what should be happening.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so true. I mean, it's just today, I mean, we can give the excuses like, well, it's just not my personality and it's not, but you know what? And I hate to say it, and I say it with grace and from my heart, you got to get over it because,
Yeah.
like I said, this is your life. It is your family's life. It's your friend's life. And, we have to do what we've got to do. It's reality today.
Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
have another off the cuff question for you. And in the case of, say, my friend who unfortunately lost her daughter, uh, what would your advice be if something has already occurred? In terms of there's already been a grave mistake, there's been something that has happened. What, if there were steps to be taken to start a process or a reporting or
Yeah.
something of that nature, like what would you say to that? Or is there any advice that you could give?
There's a lot of patient advocacy groups out there that can help patients' families with this type of thing, patients and their families. But what I hear most from these people that work with errors all the time is what they want, families, when harm has been done, they want transparency, They want to know that their family's life, if it ended, means something, meaning now we have in place safeguards that that won't happen to somebody else's family. It's this whole covert pretending it didn't happen, sweeping it under the carpet, like we said, that really upset patients and their families about the harm event. And it's the pretending that we're perfect, I suppose, and not taking accountability. So transparency and accountability are the two biggest things. So the action steps that I would recommend is meet with the hospital officials and say, this event happened, this one case, and a lot of these are on public, YouTube or whatever when you research patient safety. But it took 3 years, 7 months, and 28 days for the hospital to finally meet with the family and just be real about what really happened when their daughter died.
Oh my
And
God.
so there's got to be, I think, public initiatives demanding this and then national guidelines that say, you just have to share. That's the only way we're going to figure this out. I don't know if you remember, but Dennis Quaid, when his twins were preemies quite a few years ago,
Yeah.
what he had to go through to get that pharmaceutical company to change the labels on the heparin bottles. Heparin's a blood thinner. And so the 1 to 1,000 bottle looked very similar, almost exact, of the 1 to 10,000 bottle. Same size, same colored label, everything. So the just one zero missing. And in a hurry, you can imagine somebody picking the wrong bottle. But, you know, the right thing would have been, yeah, for sure, we'll change the label, make it green and yellow or blue and red or whatever. But he had to go to court to make that happen. But now, that it's harder to pull a bottle that looks the same, that's different. And that's why his twins were overdosed and almost died. So I'd say advocate in any way that you can,
Yeah.
but demanding transparency and advocacy and responsibility, you know?
Yeah. You said something earlier that really stuck with me, which is, I think that with people who have had unfortunate things happen or tragedy, they just want to feel heard. They want to feel
You're right.
seen. And also
Yeah.
just they have so many people just they want to be able to prevent from something happening further, And it's interesting because I had something happen this summer with one of my dogs that went into the ER and was misdiagnosed. And
Mm,
it resulted in about 3 to 4 days of extreme unnecessary pain for her. And I knew in my gut
mm,
that something was wrong. And, I knew all of the hospital administration, which was ended up being a blessing. And I met with them and spoke with them over the phone and stuff like that happened. And I told them, I said, there's nothing, fortunately, Pearls, we're on the right track now. Thank God, because it was a very sketchy situation. The pain
mm.
levels were out of control and the wrong medicine was given and all the things. And I said, but I don't want this to happen to another
Right,
dog. And when there's a
right.
doctor who doesn't have a lot of experience, that is not doesn't have someone overseeing, like it was like a resident who did it,
Mm.
and
Wow.
that resident was gone now, like they had moved on. It was funny, we moved on after just a few days, which I thought was really interesting. I'm like, oh, perfect timing. But I told the administration and the staff too, in particular, I said, I just don't want this to happen to another dog. I consider
Right.
myself blessed because,
Yeah.
and I'm so lucky. We're so blessed that it wasn't anything worse. But if
Yeah.
it's happening with one, then how many times is this happening with others? Again,
Yeah.
veterinary care there's a lot of parallels between veterinary care and patient care
Mm.
with humans. And that
Yeah.
was my overwhelming feeling was, let's make sure this doesn't happen again, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Don't make that happen in vain. Make it have some kind of meaning, especially if it's a patient's life lost.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, is there anything else in terms of tips? Just whether it's you're in a situation on your own and you don't have somebody there, or and you're coherent, or if you are a family member or a friend, is there anything else that you would like to add, just about what people can do? Any other takeaways that you want to mention?
Yeah, if you're going into surgery, make sure you've got the surgical consent signed. And they're supposed to anyway, but for example, wrong site surgeries is a huge problem. It happens about 8% of the time, which is, can you imagine? I mean, just devastating if they take out the healthy kidney and leave the diseased one in, or believe it or not, cutting off the wrong foot. And so going through to the level that you're almost like, please explain this to me like I'm a second grader. Go through what you're going to do and how you're going to do it with me and get me on board with, having that faith in you as a provider that we know what we're doing together, my body, your skills.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
make sure this turns out like it should.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's a
it's
good
just those, yeah.
that's a good that's a really, really good point. I actually know somebody that happened to. Wrong site surgery. Yep. Yep, family member.
Oh my gosh. I
Yeah.
think there's a statistic out there by the time a surgeon does, and I should have had this down, something like by the time they've done 10,000 surgery, they're now at about 25% chance that it's going to happen, that they're going to do a big error mistake like that. And here's the thing, there's a surgical safety checklist. The World Health Organization put this out years ago. Especially they keep tweaking it to be better, just like a pilot using a checklist before takeoff and before landing. It should be mandatory, but it's not. Only 69% of the hospitals use a surgery safety checklist, which just blows my mind.
What?
Yeah,
That's
why?
why?
Don't
That
know.
that does not make
All I've
any
heard
sense.
is, oh, well, it takes time. Yes, it does, but is 5 minutes of your time worth that patient's leg,
Life.
kidney,
Yeah.
breast, life? Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. That brings me to another question as we sort of wind down here, which is, are there ways, and sometimes I understand if there's an emergency critical situation, you might not always have the capability to go to another hospital, right? Like I totally get that. But are there ways that people can find out ratings of different centers and hospitals? Like, is that something that would be accessible to the public?
Yes. Yes. In fact, now that I know this, and I only learned this, I don't know, like 5 years ago, there's something called the Leapfrog Hospital Safety Grade. So you can find it on hospitalsafetygrade.org and put in your zip code. You can find all the hospitals in your area, and they're rated A through F, just like high school and college papers
Oh,
or grades. There's no E, but so there are 22 different categories, five major categories, and then subcategories of safety in that hospital. And so if your physician says, well, you can go to Summerlin Hospital or Valley Hospital, for example, and Summerlin Hospital has a D rating and Valley Hospital has a B, I know where I'm going.
right.
So
Okay.
that's a big one. But you can also look on there and see where their shortcomings are. You can see, is it that patients get blood clots after surgery, or patients get infections after surgery, or is it that the healthcare team don't communicate with each other? So you can find where the flaws or faults are, I suppose, and ask, how are you going to remedy this? If this facility has a low success rate on preventing blood clots, tell me what your prevention strategy is when I go in for my surgery.
Wow, that's a great tip. Oh my goodness, that is such a good tip. I will put this in this leapfrog, right? Is what you said. I'll put that
Hmm.
in the show notes for people so that it's accessible as a resource because I feel like that's really important. And I don't know. I feel like most people just wouldn't think that this stuff would be public. Like they wouldn't
Right.
be able to access this information, but especially if it's like like a surgery, right? Like it's a scheduled
Yeah.
situation. I mean, why not look for these key I don't know, like why not
Indicators. Yeah.
that you took, thank you, I was looking for the word, these key indicators, and why not compare hospitals or centers, because that is so, to me, that is so common sense.
In fact, if I were any member of your audience, because I've already done this for myself, I don't plan on having surgery, but what if, something happens? I already know which hospital I'm going to go to in my area. I have about five to choose from. I already know which one's the A hospital and which one's the B hospital. And I'm certainly not going to the D hospital. Your chances of dying if you go to a D rated hospital versus an A is 91% higher at the lower rated hospitals. That's not even the F.
Wow, that's
Yeah. So
insane.
it's meaningful. The other thing I would say is make sure you find a provider that you have a good rapport with, because you can pick another provider. Make sure that you don't choose a physician that doesn't have time to explain things for you or to you. Make sure that they're respect your wishes if you decide you want to go get a second opinion, because that's your right.
Yes, it
And somebody
is.
that, says something like, I don't know why you need a second one. I'm the best. I got stories about that one too.
Oh, I'm sure you do. I'm sure I do too, actually. I do too. I've had some really interesting experiences in my life because my health took a little bit of a turn when I was young. And so I've really been, which is again, it's like brought me to this place, right? But I was definitely in the conventional healthcare space getting quote unquote care. And I say that very loosely for a long time. And I could rattle off stories, some of which I've shared here in past shows, but it's crazy the things that I've heard. And so I will say
Yeah.
that it is absolutely, to your point, a right. You should be able to ask questions. You should be able to say, please, I don't understand. Can you re explain that to me? Or can I want to write this down. Or I don't know if recording, I think some people can go in and record because
Yeah.
I don't know if there's laws against that, but I want to say it's okay, right? I'm not
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. But
They may tell you no, but I mean, then you can say, well, find me a hospital administrator, please, because I can't keep up with what you're saying.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there are ways around it.
Yeah.
You just
Yeah.
have to be, like you said, persistent, diplomatic
Yeah.
and polite, but persistent.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
oh boy, some of the things I've heard, I'm just like, what? Like this cannot be real. This cannot be real
Yeah.
life, or you don't
Yeah.
need a second opinion, that kind of thing. It's like, oh, says who? Right?
Yeah.
Says who? This is my life. You're going to go home
Yeah.
you're going to go home, you're going to sit at the table and have dinner with your family tonight. Like I'm going into surgery. This is my life, my risk,
Hmm.
I don't know. It's
Yeah.
a whole, yeah, that's a whole other show. Just examples alone.
Yep.
So, in terms of your book, I feel like we've
Mhm.
probably really touched on a lot of things, but what can people expect? Because I really do feel like this is something that everybody should have in their home. I feel like everybody should uh, pick up a copy of this book because I just think like why would you not? It sounds just so helpful. I have gone through some of your reviews and so forth, and I did read something that stuck out to me, which said for such a heavy subject, it's such an easy read, which I thought was such a great review. I was on the Amazon looking at some of the reviews this week, and I feel like what can people really expect from your book?
So, an overall guide. I mean, the title is Surviving Your Hospital Stay, but it really is calling out the different things, some of which we've talked about. Number one, how to pick a hospital, how to pick a provider, um, what questions you should be able to ask, how to communicate, but also different categories like surgical categories. After surgery, what as a family member should you watch for? And I'll just share one of them real quickly is postoperative pneumonia is really
Oh
common and it
God.
can be deadly. And so it depends on the patient's underlying health, and nobody wants pneumonia. But what causes the pneumonia is not taking enough deep breaths after surgery, and sometimes people don't do that because of the pain. But when a patient goes under anesthesia, that you don't use all of your lung capacity because you don't really need to. You get artificially ventilated with oxygen. But after surgery, we've got to re-expand those little alveoli or air sacs at the very bottoms of the lungs. And so that's hard to do when you're laying down. It's hard to do from that position, and especially if it hurts. And so it's really important for coughing, which helps expand those alveoli, and deep breathing on a regular basis, like every hour. I've seen those, they're called an incentives barometer. They're about this big and they're plastic and they sit them on the bedside.
Yep.
I've seen them sitting there 4 days after surgery and nobody's taken it out of the plastic. The nurse sits it there. And the families don't know, oh, dad should be breathing on this thing, every hour to force him to expand his lungs so he doesn't get pneumonia. And early activity, don't let him lay there in bed for 2 days when he could be sitting up on the edge of the bed, and then expanding the chest and getting the blood flow going, which helps prevent the blood clots too. So there's chapters in there on surgery, um, different situations like tubes and drains. If grandma's got a tube feeding because she had a stroke, what is the care, or what should we be watching for? And I'll give you the answer already, but the head of the bed should never be flat. It should always be
Mm,
up, 30 to 45 degrees. And so that just means if the nurses put down the head of the bed, that to clean, change the sheets, all that kind of thing, it needs to go back up. And the tube feeding should be shut off during that time. The head of the bed's flat. Again, that's a story that happened. It's in my book. I think there's 30 stories in the book, and I wish they were not true, but they are.
wow.
But that one was actually one of my nursing students. It happened to her grandma. Um, yeah, so
Wow.
she ended up aspirating the tube feeding because she was laying flat. It's like having a full stomach, right?
Yeah.
And she got aspiration pneumonia and then died. So it's not to scare people, but just inform,
Yeah.
what should I know,
Yeah.
in different situations.
Yeah, a couple of minutes ago I don't know what preempted it, but I was listening to you and I thought, I hope that this doesn't stimulate fear. And you just said that. You just said it's not to stimulate fear, it's to stimulate in just being informed, And I think
Awareness.
that awareness, it's perfect. Again, I
Yeah.
feel like I'm really losing it today with the proper
No, no,
words. You're
no.
you're coming in clutch for me. Um, maybe I needed a little bit more coffee or water or both before the interview. But it is so true. It is, and I say this a lot despite subject matter. We talk about things that aren't always super pleasant on this show, but this is awareness. This is crucial information that can really help save a life. It can change the trajectory for you, for a family member, et cetera. And it's not to instill fear in people. It really is to give knowledge, to give wisdom. And when you're prepared, you're peaceful. You have peace going into situations. Preparation equals peace. If you don't have the proper tools or the proper prep in any way, shape, or form, then you're going to be anxious. You're going to be flustered. You're not going to feel grounded. And so, I know that some of this stuff is heavy and it makes me feel unsettled too, because I don't want to be in this situation. I certainly don't want any of my loved ones to be in this situation. But, in order to not be fearful, we have to know. And so I just, I want to say that right now because I do feel like there's probably some people that are going like, oh my gosh, like I don't,
Holy smokes.
yeah, this is too much. Like
Yeah.
these stories are too hard. And it is hard, I mean, it is
Yeah.
hard and it's not fair. A lot of things are not fair. But, as we've been talking about, there's so many things that can be preventable, and this is the way that you do it. So, again,
I would say to tag on to what you said for sure is when you're educated or informed, you're way less of a victim. And
yes,
nobody wants to be a victim, right?
yes, yes.
So take that power and control over your life and your family's life.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. Well, I know that I'll be getting your book. I was just actually saying that to my husband last night at dinner. I said, I feel like I should buy a bunch of books and just have them and just pass them out to people when I see them because I just feel like how this to me, this just seems like a no brainer. Like, why would you not? It seems just, one of those staple items that you need to have at all times. Cause like you alluded to earlier, there it's not really an if, it's more of a when, because we're all going to
Yeah.
have things in our life at some point. It's just kind of reality, and hopefully not anytime soon, but
Right.
it's preparation. Again, preparation is everything. What else, first of all, what other resources do you have, if you have any? What are you up to these days? Are there other ways people can connect with you? I know that you mentioned to me that you're getting ready for a TED Talk, so tell us a little bit about
Yes.
that.
I'm really excited. It's going to be on December 17th up in Stamford, Connecticut, um, at UConn, University of Connecticut out there. So I'm really excited about that. And the title of my talk is How Not to Die in the Hospital. But what I know that's a catchy one, but it truly is the purpose of exactly what we talked about today is informing and educating, and yes, some stories, but to really put those tools to use. How can we use those tools? So I'm excited about that. I also have just created some shorter ebooks for patients. It's on my Stand store, which I can give you the link for that. Or it just is, I think it's standstore.dr Julie Siemers, which is most of my socials anyway. um, Vital signs, patient deterioration, that type of thing, if you want a little more detail. And then I'm creating, or I've got about almost 20 courses done for nurses in the hospital. So it can be asynchronous on demand, where they can relearn or learn for the first time some of the core principles of how to be a safe nurse. So I'm excited about that.
That's awesome. That is gosh, that is so awesome because I feel like well, first of all, it's also kind of close to home. I haven't mentioned this the entire show, but my sister is an RN. So, yeah. So,
That's cool.
yeah, and a good one, a real good one. And I know that she's probably, if she listens to, whether or not she listens to this episode or not, I'm not sure, but I know that she'll agree with, some of the things that have been said and spoken about in terms of, how there's different professionals with different levels of experience and all of that. But I kind of feel like there might be professionals listening who are in the industry who are like, okay, well, if I want to freshen up on things or if I want to learn more, like where do I go? I don't know, like if that's readily available, but the fact that you have that and you're developing that or you've developed that is amazing because I feel like is that even something that's common?
That they're not ready? Is that what you mean? Or they
No,
don't
like
feel
meaning like they're
prepared?
no, like meaning like is there continuing ed? Like is continuing ed even common for nurses to go back in and learn more or go back to principles? It doesn't seem like something that most would do.
Most state boards of nursing require 20 to 30 continuing education credits per year to for the cycle to renew the license. Some don't, which just blows my mind. Why would you not require medical and healthcare knowledge doubles? I believe it's down to every 3 years now. And
Wow.
so, as you said earlier, there's so much to know and learn. When I was younger nurse and we learned a certain way to do things, evidence-based research tells us, oh, that's not the right way to do it based on this research we did. And so we change, and you got to keep up with that. So a lot of the continuing education out there are things not about the basics. And that's where I felt the biggest gap is the foundational concepts, the foundational knowledge. Like this may sound really silly, but there's a lot of nurses that don't even understand the difference between oxygenation and ventilation. Yeah.
Wow.
So, for example, when a patient is getting pain medications and then they're on a pulse oximetry to measure oxygen, the oxygen levels can stay up a long time
Mm.
because even when a patient starts to breathe slower and slower, they still retain enough oxygen in the blood cells to have a decent number. When I was selling patient monitoring devices several years ago, it was a little end-tidal CO2, which is a little machine about this big, and it had like a little scoop. And I would demo. So it would show the carbon dioxide it's exhaled as well as the oxygen on my finger. And the CO2 level would change almost immediately when I held my breath. You could see it climb 34, 36, 38, and the oxygen level never changed until I couldn't hold my breath anymore. So a lot of false reassurance of, oh, well, the oxygen saturation's fine, but that's not measuring the ventilation and the CO2 buildup or carbon dioxide. I know that was
Mm.
probably really technical, but it
No.
explains some physiological physiological concepts that need to be clear here to apply it to the patient's situation or scenario. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And it reminds me a little bit of, I don't know, I'm going to say I don't have all the facts. So for me to say this is for sure part of the sketchiness or the negligence that happened with my friend, but her daughter had CF, cystic fibrosis, and she was 21. And there was just so many things that she described to me that seemed like the nurses were not certain about oxygen levels and so forth. There was just a lot off. And I don't have the correct verbiage to even give you because
Right.
I'm not educated in it the way that even my friend is, right? She's more educated in it than me because she raised her daughter for 21 years. But that resonates with some of the stuff that I was hearing. So that makes sense to me, unfortunately.
There's just gaps in that
Gaps.
foundational knowledge.
Yeah.
So that's what I
Yeah.
would like to try to repair or
Yeah.
fill.
Well, that's awesome. Again, like I said, a half hour ago, you saw a hole that needed to be filled and you're filling it, which is, more than most people do. And I have so much respect for you. And I love that you approach the continuing ed from with a different angle too. Like sometimes we really do have to scale it back to the foundations and all the other stuff is really important and the continuing and in which things are changing and there's new research and all of that. But how often do we lose the foundational stuff despite career, despite subject
Right.
matter, right? Like sometimes the
Yeah.
stuff just gets lost along the way because all these, there's just other things that you're focusing on, but the foundational stuff is really so crucial. So the fact that you have that available for people who are in the profession is incredible. And friends, if you are in the profession and you're looking to maybe renew just some of the foundational things, like give Julie's resources a look. Again, all of this stuff will be in the show notes. I will make sure to get all of the links and put them in there for you. And as I always say, if you cannot find something, please reach out to me and I will try to point you in the right direction, or I can contact Julie and she can help me out as well. It has been such a pleasure. This has been, again, like I told you earlier, a very anticipatory conversation for me because I just feel like there's such a need for it. And there's a million things that I felt like I wanted to learn and ask you, and I will be getting your book. Thank you so much for doing what you're doing. Thank you for showing up in the way that I don't think is always easy. And just for, again, following the call on your life because you're making a huge difference and a huge impact, whether you see it or not. And I just
Thank
feel
you.
like, wow, kudos to you. Honestly, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me and allowing me to share my passion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, my friends, thank you so much for joining us today. I will see you on the next episode. Have a wonderful rest of your day.